The post office bought that as part of the New Deal, and there were some standard designs of post offices in the 1930s. That's a certain corbelled brick design. And if you go all over the country, you can see a lot of post offices that look from the outside identical to that one. You say, hey, that's Chelsea's post office. Over the top of the three bays, it's a three-bay structure, are some bas-relief sculptures of the three ways that the mail was carried in those days. There's a train, there's a boat, and there's an airplane. As part of the New Deal, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, also wanted to provide employment for artists and craftsmen as well as workers and laborers and so on. So they commissioned artists to paint murals for these post offices, and they wanted every post office to have a mural painted by a local artist and on a local subject. So when you go over into western Pennsylvania, you'll see murals in those post offices of steel mills belching smoke. So this artist was from Detroit, and he painted this as a love affair with Michigan. George Fisher was his name.
Manufacturing, yeah.
Fisher was the artist. So it shows these trees protecting that healthy young couple. The branches are coming over, and they've got this beautiful baby, and he's been sawing logs or chopping wood, and there's a grindstone for sharpening some of his tools, but they're relaxing. She's kicked off a shoe, and it's just a...
Kind of reminds me of the Spirit of Detroit's thing, this, yeah.
It's he called it way of life, and it's a vision of what a wonderful way of life you can have in Michigan. Elisha Congdon was this later in life, and he was not worrying where his next nickel was going to come from. It's often said that he copied the Martha Washington House. There's a building, it's something like 1701 Huron Street in Ann Arbor. On your way into Ann Arbor, a couple blocks before you get to that underpass, just before you get to downtown, look on the right and there's an identical building. The only problem with that story is that this house was finished before the Martha Washington House was, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't copied. The story is so widespread, I haven't seen it refuted. Anyway, they built this thing. It's a typical upscale Italianate building, and it's squarish, and it's got like 3 floors. There are lie-on-your-stomach windows on the 3rd floor, but there were quite a few rooms up there, bedrooms and things. And this was a personal residence for Elisha Congdon and his family. He lived there for 7 years and then died of old age, and his widow sold that to Timothy, was that his first name, McCune, who used it as a roadhouse or an inn, and it's a place where you could stop and wet your whistle and get a room for the night and so on.
It sure looked like that right up until the renovation. I mean, it pretty much stayed the same forever. It had a beautiful children's room upstairs. Had a fireplace, as I recall, had an archives room, the library did, but the carpeting, the wallpaper, and everything, it just looked like time stood still in the building.
And it's an Italianate architecture, another one of those Victorian ones, as are many of the buildings in downtown Chelsea. Although Chelsea is lucky because those are sprinkled with a Romanesque and a neoclassical, and we've got variety in the Sixth style and Art Moderne until we lost our Daniel showroom, but we have all this variety. Italianate architecture became popular before you had steel beams to support weight. So how did you support the weight of the roof? With the walls. If you cut big window openings in the walls, they're not going to be able to support it, so you make the windows narrow. How are you going to get enough light in if the windows are narrow? You're going to run them down almost to the floor and clear up to the ceiling. And so all these Italianate buildings have tall, narrow windows, including to an extent the McCune House, although they're a little larger than most Italianates. But it was a beautiful thing. Catherine McCune, the wife of Timothy, willed that to the library, gave it to them as long as they used it as a library. The library eventually outgrew it. What to do? We wanted to preserve the McCune House and yet have a large modern library, and so the solution was a good one in my view. from Main Street. Due to perspective, you see this big, beautiful McCune House. Behind it is a very large modern library with the latest technology. I think it works very well. And the McCune House portion of that is used for public purposes mostly, public gatherings and meetings.
Let's look to next door now and talk about the United Methodist Church.
Yeah, that's a beautiful building. A lot of the stones came from neighboring ranches and farms. For a lot of years, it was felt that that was architected by Claire Allen. Our historian has found documentation that that's not the case. Another firm designed it, but it's a beautiful Romanesque thing with the stepped parapets on the various faces. 12 openings in the bell tower that are Romanesque arches on the top, and the Romanesque arches over the big windows. And it's just a wonderful building. The original building there at that same location burned to the ground mysteriously. But it is I don't suppose spectacular is too grand a word, Romanesque structure that was engineered and architected and built out of a lot of surrounding stone. It was added onto sensitively a couple of times. They needed more space. And in each case, the architects who designed the add-ons said we're going to be sympathetic to the original building and not clash with it, and nor are we going to try to fool everybody into saying this too is as old as the original structure. You can tell when you look closely what's new and what's old, and that's intentional. And then they more recently built an education wing on. So it's the ideal thing that happens to an old building. You keep it alive, you keep it restored, and you sensitively adapt it to changing requirements as time goes by.